This is The Spot, a BYU-Idaho radio production where we talk about what you're talking about at BYU-Idaho. The views and opinions of this podcast are not that of BYU-Idaho Radio or the university and are solely the opinions of the hosts. Today's hosts are
Austin Pace,
Abigail Barber,
Kriss Pond,
and Maiya Waddell. Today we're talking about housing and roommates. All right, guys. So I kind of want to know y'all's spot takes regarding housing and roommates. Who wants to start?
I can start. So this one, I'd actually love to hear a little bit more from you, because this is one my roommates and I did a little bit of a deep dive, and we're still so confused. So my wife, she lived in Provo before, and we were kind of comparing our housing prices. And my spot take is I feel like students are paying a little too much for the type of housing that they're getting, but I'm sure there is an explanation for that. So I guess what kind of goes into that?
Well, I actually am interested to think that the assessment between BYU Provo housing and Rexburg BYU-Idaho housing came up as more expensive, because we've always heard the opposite.
Okay.
And so the housing was much more expensive in Utah Valley than it is here. Several years ago, we actually did an assessment of all Northwest colleges and universities, and BYU-Idaho came in actually the most affordable, cost-effective of all colleges and universities for their housing.
Wow.
And so, that's several years old, but every time we do a little assessment and we look at Boise and we look at Northern Idaho and we look at, Montana and Wyoming, our housing actually comes in lower than all of our surrounding states. Wow. So that's an assessment that we probably need to do every few years to make sure. But here's what goes into it. I'll say that students fall into this trap of there's 6 of us and each of us pay this much money and there's this many apartments, therefore the owners are making this much money, they're making bank, right? And so we all assume that they're millionaires, multimillionaires, because they're making so much money. The truth is, I've worked both in the housing department at BYU-Idaho, but also for a couple of years I worked as a general manager for a third-party property management company that oversaw 10 of the Rexburg single student housing properties. Okay. And what I learned in that experience was actually most of our owners are barely making any money, and a lot of them operate in the red. Here's why. Property tax. Astronomical. That's on top of the loan that they have, the construction loan for their property. There's utilities, and inevitably you have somebody who wants the heat at 75 and somebody who wants it at 65, and you've got windows open and the heater on 80. And so the utility cost for these owners is astronomical. Parking lots, the maintenance and upkeep of just a parking lot, let alone the furnishings and the upkeep of the building. They pay on-site managers. Most of them now pay a third-party management company to operate the company. And so their cost, they very, very rarely make money in the operation. They make money in the sale of the property, but they don't make much money in the operation. And so consequently, we see a lot of turnover of owners. Owners don't stick around for a really long time. There are a few still in the housing market that have been here forever, but a lot of them, they can't survive in the market. And so when you see a little bit of creep of prices and you're like, wait, that's getting so expensive, or they just raised my rent $100, it's because they're doing a lot of market research to make sure that they're able to keep up with inflation. Their costs go up, their building costs go up, their maintenance costs go up. All of those things increase. They've got to be able to recoup it somehow, and that's through price increases, which is consistent in single student housing as well as in the community, right? It happens in the community as well.
Yeah. With the housing, there's a huge housing bubble going on. And I know a little bit about that because my family recently moved house. So it's really hard for people to afford housing just in general. And
across the U.S., right?
So housing, that totally makes sense that housing would be more expensive at these places.
Yeah.
However, I will say that living in single student housing is much more cost effective than living in the community housing. And so it's furnished, your utilities are included. And so when you look at the cost our typical cost is $350 to about $550 for a private room, $350 for a shared room per month.
Wow.
But if you were to go into the community, it's typically for a married couple,
Yeah.
$1,000 to $1,500 a month, right?
Yeah.
And when you divide that between you, you're still $500 to $750, and then you've got utility costs on top of that.
Right.
And so it actually is a great deal, considering what's happening all around us.
For sure.
But yeah, it's hard. It's hard when the prices go up, and it's hard when you're living on a student budget, and we totally get that. But later, if the question comes up, I can talk to you about how to save money in housing.
Great.
Awesome. That'd be great. So how do you save money on housing?
Okay, there's a couple of things that I recommend. So there are certain fixed costs. Recently, we've gone through a transparency effort to try to get all of our owners. The great thing about approved housing is we have a relationship with and a contract with every owner that provides single student housing at BYU-Idaho.
That's amazing. That's awesome.
So that's the blessing and the benefit for BYU-Idaho approved housing, which other universities and schools do not have. So if you have issues with the conditions or the maintenance, you can come to us. We can help you. We can help reinforce those principles and standards. We hold standards. We do inspections. But some of the things are fixed costs, and then a lot of them are actually student election. So by student choice or by student neglect. And so damages or cleaning charges may be assessed. And so I would say do a really, really good job. But there's a booklet on the Attorney General of Idaho has a booklet called the Idaho Tenant Guidelines. That's a really great resource for students. You should always do a move-in inspection and turn in all damages and cleaning that needs to be done to your management. That will help you avoid charges at the end of the semester.
Right.
And then doing a really good job when you leave and taking pictures and videos of your cleaning will help you be able to refute any charges that were not yours. So that's one way to save money in the student elected charges.
Right.
Another thing you can do if you're really cost conscious, there are properties that do different promotions or deals. I know at our own Center Square, which is our BYU-Idaho owned and operated housing, we have a spring price lock. It's the lowest price of all housing in the spring, and if you lock at that price, then every other semester you live there thereafter you get that same price, which is like
That's a deal.
$1,100.
Yeah.
Right? So that's an amazing deal. And then if you live there fall, winter, even if you take a break and you come back, you'll still get that spring price lock. So various properties have different promotionals for your signing bonuses. And then my third tip is we have what's called the buy-sell it's a buy-sell bulletin. And if you go to the housing website, at the bottom of the website, there's something that says buy-sell contracts. Right now, it wouldn't work for young men because we are so tight. We have only 2 beds left in all of approved housing for young men.
Wow.
And that's after we converted 130 women's beds to men for this winter. So we have a lot of men here right now. And we've been trying to get men into housing. But typically, on a typical semester, you look at those buy-sell contracts. As the semester gets closer, students are obligated to pay for their contract within 60 days of the start of the semester. Prior to that, they can cancel. But within that 60 days, they have to sell it. And so as the semester gets closer and students have changed their mind, they've gotten married, they've gone on missions, they've gone on internships, they have a contract that they need to unload, they'll start discounting those prices. So if you're looking in those buy-sell contracts, even if you wait until the first week of school, if you're local or something especially, but if you can wait until the last minute, you could get several $100s off. I've seen them up to even half off this semester.
Wow.
That is so crazy. That's a good deal. You just kind of have to know how to figure those things out and work with the deals that are offered by properties as well as students that are selling contracts.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for the tips.
You bet.
So our next talking point is single housing experiences and married housing experiences. So I've only ever been in single housing. I know you've been in both.
Yes.
But yeah, what's that like?
Okay, so there is a very big difference, especially in the wards. I met my new ward this last Sunday, and they were cool. They were nice. It's very different. I really don't know how to explain it. Married people are just
not
different.
As social?
They're not as social. Yes, they're either not as social or they're really social.
Wow.
And you kind of get a little scared. But one of my thoughts on it is how different each ward is, especially in single housing. I was in 3 different wards. I lived in bunkhouse all 3 semesters that I was living here. I lived in 3 different apartments there. And with that, I was in 3 different wards, and it was very interesting how just polar opposites each ward was. For my first ward, it was so segregated. The guys sat on one side and the girls sat on the other, and there was no communication.
Wow.
None. It was really interesting. FHE wasn't a thing. My group was the only group that did FHE. And it was because my sister was my FHE sister. So we were like, all right, let's get this planned. We're going to do it.
Yes.
My second ward, the ward was vibrant. Everybody was talking to everyone. It was so easy to make friends. And I literally just moved one building over, and it was completely different. My third ward, it was, the people were a little bit more held back, but our bishopric was stellar. They were amazing. And because of that, it kind of helped other people branch out a little bit. So like with single and married housing, in the ward aspect, it's completely different, but I also just think it depends on just the luck of the draw with what ward you're in.
It's leadership, but it's also the culture of the property.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you had 3 different experiences at the same property. I would have thought you would have different experiences at different properties because that's pretty common. Because there are properties that are just known to be more social and interactive, and there's properties that are quieter. And so I would expect that from a property, but to have that experience within the same property is really unique, how students gravitated to that. But yeah, you always need a lodestar, right? You need somebody that's willing to go out and initiate and start things. And if you're in a ward that's not as social, like nobody says that you can't do it, right? That you can't start creating and creating gatherings and creating that culture and that feeling. So students should feel like they have the ability to be a leader, like that small L leadership we talked about at BYU-Idaho. Happens in wards, it happens in apartments, it happens in the complex, in addition to happening in class.
For sure.
Yeah. I stayed at a private housing on that note, like with different cultures, and we had less than half the ward attending. Frequently, like people stayed in their housing, and it was just, I mean, I hardly ever interacted with my roommates. It was, I mean, like they were nice people, but like I didn't really know them very well.
Can I tell you, I just finished reading a fabulous book. It's called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. It talks about the youth of today, the Gen Z that was raised primarily with phones, the phone-based childhood, they call it, where people are interacting through social media, they're interacting on computer games, video games, etc. And this was an interesting thing. This gentleman that wrote the book, The Anxious Generation, he's actually an atheist. But he wrote a chapter on spirituality, which was my favorite chapter in the entire book, because it talks about having embodied experiences, which is person-to-person experiences with one another. And he talks about how that created, like over thousands of years, that our religious observances created opportunities for us to interact with one another. Right? We go to church, there's observing special observances and holidays and rituals. We pray together, we partake of the sacrament together. But now this generation is less inclined to have embodied experiences because all of their socialization, not all of it, but a good portion of it, is happening virtually. And so they're not having in-person experiences. And so maybe they're not even coming out of their rooms, but they're definitely not feeling a need to go to church and to have that experience with other people because they feel like, you know, I've got everything I need right here. Right. And I can plug into it anytime. It doesn't shut off. It doesn't have holidays or Sabbaths. And I can plug in anytime I need to and get the socialization that I would like. But very, very interesting that it has created a division in our society of people actually having person-to-person, face-to-face embodied experiences with one another, which is what strengthens relationships.
Oh, yeah. I actually gave a presentation on this last semester, and I told my roommates who I gave the presentation to just like how important it is to have that face-to-face communication, because we're slowly losing that with technology. And they were pretty shocked to just see the stats of people who are more depressed when they're on their phones versus people who are not.
That's what this whole book is about. You know, it's interesting. We have this dilemma between shared and private rooms. Everybody wants a private room now. Everyone wants a private room. And it's so that they can retreat, have their private space. And for some, that's really essential, that recharge. But we have stopped allowing the building of private rooms. That was a short window, and here's why. We have found that in apartments where there's shared space, people tend to be interacting more. In apartments where there's private spaces only, they don't interact. I go in, they don't even know each other's names. I'll say, what's your roommate's name? I don't know. I think it's Cody. And I'm like, what? You've lived together for 8 months and you don't know his name in bedroom number 2?
I do have a teacher who would forget my name even though I'd already had him for the semester, and then it was my second semester. So some people do have bad memories.
That's true. But he also has hundreds of students every day. Not 5 roommates that he shares a bathroom and a kitchen with.
I think he had like a dozen students a day but yeah, I mean, at the end of the semester, like he actually like figured out my name, but I knew he put in the effort because he said my name.
He tried.
Yeah.
Yes, that's so great. And then maybe the best blend, we have some apartments that have a shared and private. So there's a private room and a shared bedroom.
Yeah.
It's interesting because just having a shared bedroom in the apartment draws everybody out, even though somebody still needs private space. I wish we had more of those because I think that's the perfect blend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But what do we think about ward boundaries, though? Because I know that sometimes I've been really close to my ward, but other times I've had to walk straight across campus in the freezing colds.
We have nothing to do with that. That actually is all managed in Salt Lake City.
Oh.
And so what happens is, because of the influx of students every semester, we have more in the fall, a little bit less in the winter, and much less in the spring. Yeah. They have to realign boundaries every semester, and those requests have to go to Salt Lake City. And Salt Lake City, and it's all based on, of course, we know in the Doctrine and Covenants, the number of priesthood holders you have, et cetera. And so they're trying to balance the wards based on the number of bodies that are in those properties. So if you happen to live at a property that's only 50 or 40% occupied in the spring, then your boundary is going to change and you're going to be wrapped into another space. And so we actually have no control over the ward boundaries.
Oh, wow.
We wish we could influence that a little better, because I truly believe if you live at the same property or adjacent proproperties, you're going to have a stronger ward. Because you see each other more and you see each other outside and you spend more time together. It's easy to go across the street and have breakfast or something on a conference Saturday morning. And so it does facilitate interaction when they're adjacent, but unfortunately we don't control that.
Yeah. One thing that I found, so with each ward, my first ward, that was the really non-social ward. It was actually the apartment complex right next to ours.
Really?
Yeah, it was really interesting. So I was at bunkhouse, that was Royal
Crest. Yes.
Yeah. My next ward, it was bunkhouse and carriage house. So a little further, but still pretty close. And then my last ward was bunkhouse and Birch, which was really interesting.
Moving up the street.
Yeah, just moving up the street. But one thing that my roommates found that was really successful was, it was this last semester, we started to do a waffle night.
Oh,
it was
great idea,
fantastic.
Austin.
So our first Sunday, my roommates, because I was with my fiance at the time, we went and we were visiting some other people, but my roommates, they talked to every single person in the ward, especially the young women, of course. Talked to every single person in the ward and invited them over for a waffle night. All they had to do was bring a topping or whatever. Like half an hour before, they went and knocked on every single door in our ward and just invited them over. And that created so much unity within our ward, and it also created unity with our bishop. It was really cool. He heard about it and he was like, hey, that's fantastic. He came to one of them.
Oh, that's great.
It was one of those where it created so much unity, but there were people that didn't come because it was a little bit farther away. But it's really interesting how you're saying like it's adjacent. I guess I've just had a really interesting experience.
You have had.
Yeah.
Yeah, but creating those opportunities. When I lived in Salt Lake City, I was a young adult, I was single, and I lived in a place in Holiday, Utah, and we actually started doing something similar. But my roommates and I determined, we were reading in the scriptures, but we found in the book of Luke, where it talks about when you create a feast, don't invite your rich neighbor, lest a recompense be made thee, but invite the maimed, the halt, the lame, the poor, for they cannot recompense thee, but your recompense will be in the resurrection of the just. Essentially, it was like, don't try to just hang with the popular kids. Find people that actually need to be included. So we started these gatherings and started inviting people over. Pretty soon our ward, we were just getting together all the time. It was amazing. And I still call that ward Zion. And among that group, it's been 25 years, are still my best friends. Like, we have reunions, we get together, like, we are dear friends, but it's because we decided, the people that needed to be included. I'll just give one example. Sean, there was a young man in our ward who had lupus and was in a wheelchair most of the time. And we started inviting Sean to these activities. Well, sometimes people had to carry him up 3 flights of stairs to get to the apartment.
That sounds very uplifting, though.
Right, very uplifting, right? Good one, Abby. But it was terrific. Like, when we started rallying around, everybody in the ward was included. Everybody was welcome. Everyone was loved. It changed our ward, just like you said. and it was the activity that changed the feeling even on Sundays to where we loved to worship together. We loved one another, and we grew in our faithfulness and our discipleship, all of it.
I love that. That's beautiful.
Honestly, I am kind of curious in terms of like roommates. How do you deal with roommate problems, if there are any?
Well, the very best medicine is preventative. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right?
Yeah.
So I try really hard. So I oversee student living at BYU-Idaho. That's my primary role within the Housing and Student Living Office, is to teach students how to live better together. And we start with the very, very beginning. And that's having communications early and often. We call it roommate counsel. It doesn't have to be that formal. And it definitely doesn't happen just when you have problems. In fact, by the time you have problems, you're probably past a roommate counsel. Roommate counsel is sitting down and deciding how you're going to live together. We say there's 5 things that students absolutely must talk about. And my 15 years in housing gives me the experience to say these are the 5 things that students have issues with. Sharing, cleaning, schedules, guests, and use of multimedia and other entertainment. So those are the 5 things. You've got to talk about those 5 things. And I'd say the 2 that cause conflict are guests and cleaning.
Yeah.
Inevitably, when a student comes into my office, it always boils down to guests in the apartment and cleaning.
Wow.
And so I say, talk about those things. Decide how you're going to live. Create intentional time that you're going to spend together as an apartment. Those who don't know each other as well are going to have more conflict.
Yeah.
And so I say, get to know your roommates, spend time. And usually when students come into me, it's about midterms to 3 weeks before the end of the semester, and they've just had it, and the pot has boiled over.
Yeah.
And now it's irreconcilable. They want to move. They want somebody kicked out. And I'm like, what you have here is not a cleaning problem. What you have here is a relationship problem.
Yeah.
And so,
cleaned up.
right? Like, do not focus on the problem. I want you to focus on the person. And I want you to spend time with them. And when you go shopping, invite them to come. When you go exercise, invite them to come. If there's anybody in your apartment you're not getting along with, spend more time with them, not less.
Yeah.
Smart. I like that.
And you'll overcome that. And that's how you have great roommate relationships.
Wow. That is so amazing. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks, Maiya.
Yes, of course. We actually did a poll on our Instagram account regarding who is living where.
Yes.
And so I will read the results of that later in the episode. So that will be exciting.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So I'm curious, where can people go to find housing? Just like, where can they go to find more information regarding housing, finding all of the things we've kind of talked about? Where could we go to find that?
Okay, on our housing website. Now, I'm going to say this up front. We are developing a new tool that is going to be phenomenal. Right now, IT is developing a tool that looks like kind of a blend of like Zillow and Airbnb, right?
Perfect.
So
you're going to be
cool.
able to go in, look at ratings, look at what people have said about the property. It'll show all the amenities. It'll show pictures, how much parking is available, right? Everybody needs to know that.
Yes.
You can't sign a contract without signing for parking because we just don't have enough. And so anyway, that will be probably rolled out the first week of April. And so right now our housing tool does some of that. It'll help you locate housing, but it's going to get so much more beautiful. It's going to show the Walmart shuttles, minutes to classes.
Oh
like
my
if you're an engineering student, you're going to say, here's the quadrant I want to focus on living because it's close to the engineering building.
Right.
And so, 2-minute walk from my home to my campus classes. So anyway, it's going to be really, really an amazing tool. So we're in the process of developing that.
I'm so pleased to meet that.
Yes.
We needed it. Our tool right now was built in 2012. So we needed some updates. It's slow, but it still allows you to sort by price. It allows you to sort by whether you want a private room, music rooms, exercise rooms, laundry in facility, all those things that are important to you. You can sort by vacancy. So that's how you find housing right now. It's just going to get way more glorious and provide so much more transparency for students to be able to make a choice that suits not only their style, price point, but also lets you look at the reviews. I don't buy anything on Amazon unless it has 1,000 reviews and they're 4
Same.
points, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is going to be really, really good for students to be able to make selections based based on what other people's experiences have been.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I look it up on Google. Like, I'll just look up a house or anything, and they have reviews on Google, but that's a little bit like going out of your way to look into stuff like that.
Well, the Google will be linked in this tool. So it will be the Google reviews, but it's linked in this tool.
So it's like all in one place.
All in one. And they'll be beautiful. We're really excited about it.
Will that include married housing?
It does.
It does.
But married housing looks a little bit different because we don't have a contract with our married providers, but our community page is getting a facelift as well.
Great.
And so our community page is going to use something very similar that has like all of the websites that lead you to housing, like Find My Place and third-party property management companies, the Facebook pages that post contracts for sale, subsidized housing information. So it'll look not as glorious. It's not going to have all the pictures and the amenities highlighted, but it will have links that will take you to those pages so that you can find housing much more easily.
Yeah.
It is a challenge for our married students. They live from St. Anthony to Shelley. They're trying to find housing through the whole valley, and so it will help facilitate married housing, finding contracts as well.
And that's great. One of the problems that my wife and I fell into was we couldn't find like married housing. I looked on Google, I was like BYU-Idaho married housing, and it would show a couple of different links, but it was a lot of repeats.
Yeah.
So we were like, there's no way that's all the options.
Right.
So that was kind of one thing that was pretty hard for us. And like you were saying, I have a friend, she's living all the way out in St. Anthony.
I know.
Because she couldn't find anything here, it's cheaper.
Yes.
But so like, I think having a tool where that's all kind of, might not look as pretty, but if it's there, would make the search a lot easier because we found housing. We had to jump on it because they were open.
Yes.
And we were kind of looking, and I found out where my sister was living, where my cousin was living. And I'm like, they're paying much less than we are. I wish I knew, but where we're at is fine. It's great. It's cute, but we wish we were able to have more of those options.
Well, we hope to build more married student housing like University Village, which is campus owned. We hope in the future that happens for us because we have a long wait list and we can provide really economical and beautiful housing, which is well maintained, which then we have control over, right? We don't have control over anything in the community. But I want to put in this plug. That's why it's important that single students under the age of 26 stay in approved housing and not drift into the community.
Yes.
Because when students drift into the community, first of all, they'll get a hold on their record because as soon as you register for class, it matches that with your housing address. And if you're not in approved housing, you'll get a housing hold.
Yeah.
And then you'll have a conversation with us and we'll invite you back into approved housing. But that protects housing for our married students because when single students who could be and should be living in approved housing, which I'll give you the 5 reasons why we think that's important, when they gravitate into the community, it consumes the housing that's available for our married students. It also drives up prices because then when there's
More
high demand, that supply and demand rule. So it is a really nice balance that we need to maintain between the community housing available for married students and the single student housing. So here's why we have single student housing. Number one reason is the prophet said it was a good idea. Right? So we come under the direction of the Board of Education, which is headed by the prophet and members of the First Presidency and various members of the Quorum of the 12 and the 70. But the reason why we have it different here, I know BYU looks different. I know Hawaii looks different. In fact, Hawaii, they're going to have almost all of their students living on campus. They're currently building new hales. I was just there in August on a housing trip, which was so fun. But they're trying to get all of their students on campus. BYU, very few of their students are on campus. BYU-Idaho, we have an age range where our single students live in approved housing. So the prophet said so, and that's why we think it's a good idea. But here's why. When you live in approved housing, you live within 3 blocks of the university. You're automatically in a single student BYU-Idaho ward.
Right.
You're automatically in a home evening group, right? That socialization. You're closer to what happens on campus. You can be more involved in activities and events. You don't. When you live 2 or 3 miles from campus, you don't come to campus to see what's happening in the evening.
Right.
And so your socialization, there's standards. We have an agreement with all of the owners. We do inspections annually. There's certain standards they need to keep. Now, sometimes they fall below that and they need a reminder, or because they're just old properties, they need some maintenance to keep them
rejuvenation.
I always say every property can be clean and well maintained, even if it's old. Every single property can be clean and well maintained, and it should be, and that's our expectation. But we have a little bit of leverage when something happens in your property that that is not
Okay.
conducive to those standards, right? So if you have mold or other issues or you don't get your deposit back, we can help you. And so those are reasons why we feel like it is such a benefit. And then the last one is price. And we already talked about that.
Yeah.
It is much more economical to live in approved housing. You can have a 1 semester contract. You're not locked into a year contract. And, you know, the cost overall is less.
Much better.
For sure.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I feel like I've learned a lot today.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I love to talk about housing.
Yeah.
I just think students can have the best experience at BYU-Idaho when their housing experience is good, because you spend more time in your housing than you do in class, at the bookstore,
Anywhere
at
else.
Kiwi Loco,
Yeah.
at the gym.
Oh, yeah.
You spend more time in your housing than anywhere else. So you should create a space where you feel comfortable, happy,
And safe.
all of those things. And we can help you with that. Come visit us.
Yes, thank you so much. I don't know, guys, should we play a quiz?
Let's do it.
I'm ready.
So fun. Yeah. So the first question is, it's about where each of us are staying in terms of housing. So can you guess, let's guess where Austin's staying first.
It was stuck at the beginning, so let's see how
see
good
how's the
memory is.
Courtyard.
Correct. Yep.
Yes. Go. Second one is me. Guess where I'm staying.
I gotta remember, because I remember Carriage House
Yeah.
and
Royal Crest?
no,
Rural Crest.
it wasn't.
Is there what
Let
was
me
a
think
hint?
for a minute.
Center Square?
No, it's not Center Square. Big or small?
Bigger.
Bigger?
Yeah, it's bigger.
Are you at Nauvoo? No, you're not. Let's see. I gotta go through that again.
Is it North
Side
Point?
of campus.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
North Point?
It is
Yes.
North Point.
Got
I was
it.
like, you gotta show me the side of campus. Man, I'm sorry, I forgot, Abigail.
It's okay. I don't think I ever mentioned it.
I don't know if I did get that out of you, because I would remember North Point, but I remembered Carriage House.
Yes.
Yes.
Carriage House.
And I take it you're not staying in student housing.
I'm not, but I lived at Greenbrier when I was a student here many years
cool.
ago. So
So
I have a
cool.
special place in my heart for Greenbrier.
Yeah. So now we have our questions that are more like straightforward. So how many approved student housing locations are there for women, single women?
We have, I've never been asked that. We have 16,148 single student beds.
Dude, wow.
And we have 68 unique properties that house those 16,148 beds.
Okay.
I would say 70% of them, at least 65% of them are women.
Okay.
So if I were to go through the list, I could list all the women's housing properties.
I bet you could.
I could. I've been in every one of them. But I know there's shared properties, but then there's some uniquely women's housing properties, like Royal Crest, Carriage House,
Right.
Towers. So there's some that are just uniquely women, but a lot of them now have gone to a blend to facilitate more sociality.
So you have a ballpark answer?
Ballpark answer of how many women's properties there are? Just women or
just take a guess.
women and combined?
Let's just do, so it's women's and then just women and combined. Like
Women and
how
combined?
many housing options are there for women who are single? Like let's all go.
I would say,
But before you guess, I want
you want them to guess?
Yeah, because they probably don't know.
No
Okay.
idea.
I've already seen the answer, so I feel like I'd be biased.
That's cheating. Okay. Do you have-
Should I say 147?
Wow.
Like properties?
Yeah.
Well, we only have 68 properties.
Oh, so like bedding, housing.
So you would say how many of those properties are women, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So confirm it's less than 68, right?
It's less.
30?
I'm going to
Not quite.
say 55.
It's 47.
47.
Oh,
47.
really close. Dang.
Well, 100.
She said
147.
Right.
Just need to take the one off.
Yes. Yes.
Just one off.
Dang.
And the last question is looking at the answer.
I'm not.
I can't see that
It's all
without
the
my
way up.
glasses.
Sweet, sweet, sweet. How many married housing options are listed on the BYU-I housing website? So for community housing plus University Village.
I'm going to say about 30.
30?
40?
I'll go 50.
It's 68.
68.
68.
Wow.
married?
Yes.
Wow.
I
That's
counted
crazy.
them. They have them all listed out in these
Yeah,
rows.
we do. Yeah, we do have them in
I
rows.
probably saw like 8.
You're like, I didn't make it that
I was like,
far.
68, where was that?
That's on, yeah, it's on the community housing
Wow.
underneath like
Okay.
that tab. Like I counted them all. It
Yeah,
was
there's
crazy.
a lot of them, but man, I didn't think it was
68.
But there
are little teeny tiny places that are listed on there. You know, like
you're right.
the Sugar House. You know, we're all thinking Mesa Falls kind of stuff, but like
We got the little.
we got some little ones. Very, very cool.
So fun. Now, guys, I'm going to reveal the results of the poll. Are you guys ready?
So what is the poll? Tell me, the poll was,
it was pretty
what
much,
question did we ask students?
we asked them where they're living.
Oh, okay, there we go.
So 75% of students said student housing. They're living like on student housing. 7% said they're living at home. And married housing is 18%.
Okay.
Yeah. So
We'll have
those
to
were
add those up and see if that
the results too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Terrific.
So that's awesome. Thank you guys so much for answering back to the poll on the Instagram. And what do we think about roommate experiences? Did we talk about that today?
Not as much. We talked about them a little bit. Most of my roommate experiences have been quite nice. I'd say I have this amazing in-room roommate this semester. She is fantastic. Like we're just doing bonding, spending time together. Like she's so sweet and friendly, and I think just bonding with your roommates is the best way to do it. Yeah, I've had some really sweet roommates. My first semester up here, I had one roommate. She wasn't my in-room roommate, but she was so nice and she reached out to me and she was really friendly. I'd say I've had some roommate experiences that weren't so great, but it was mostly with honor code stuff. So the 5 things you listed, I haven't really had a huge problem with any of those. I've mostly had problems with honor code.
But did the honor code include a guest?
Kind of, just
Right, that's where that falls in.
at one point,
Right,
time.
Like guests being in places they shouldn't be, or staying later than they should, or staying over. That's typically where we come in trouble with guests.
It's always so difficult to do those confrontations.
Oh, you know what? And I would never even recommend a confrontation. I always think we've got to assume that either they don't know or they don't understand the reason for that standard. And I quote to students probably every day a quote by President Thomas S. Monson that says he was a heretic, a rebel, a thing to flout, right? Like how many students think that the curfew is bogus and they're like, oh, that's just dumb, right? So a heretic, a rebel, a thing to flout. He drew a circle that shut me out. Like that happens all the time. They're like, it's none of your business, or we think it's none of our business. But Love and I had the will to win, and we drew a circle that took him in. And I'm like, we have got to start spreading our arms and wrapping in roommates who may be resistant or who may not understand, who may come from an upbringing or a place. We have students who are coming that are new members of the church who may not come from a strong background, or maybe they were actually the strongest in their whole high school. But when they get plopped in the middle of this mecca of Latter-day Saints, maybe their clothing or maybe their behaviors or their language is not the same because they've grown up in a place where maybe it's a little bit rougher. And I'm like, we've got to get over the judgment and start wrapping people in and assuming that they want to live the covenant life and that we're placed in their life to help them, not to pass judgment. But here's the thing, you've got to speak up. I was talking with a young man once. He said, my roommate's drinking alcohol. And I said, well, how do you know that? He said, well, because I see him. And he goes, when I walk in, it's in his hand. And I said, so what do you say? And he said, I don't say anything. And I was like, oh, silence is permission. And if I could share anything, silence is permission. You have got to speak up. But it doesn't mean you say, did you know you're breaking the honor code?
Yeah, I don't.
You say something like, hey, how did that get here? You know, just genuine surprise. Whoa, hey, what's up? Tell me what's going on. Like just genuine surprise, concern, and love. And that's the way we wrap people in. And that's how we help them want to live the covenant path with us. And we just consistently start doing patterns and behaviors that bring the Spirit in our apartment. Hey, let's say prayers on apartment. Do you guys want to go to home evening? Let's go to church together. I'm driving. Let's have dinner together after church. Like we have a lot of power that we don't realize because we think we need to stay in our corner and not be involved in anybody's business. And if we do get in their business, that it has to be confrontational. No. It is kind, it's gentle, it's compassionate, but it's speaking up and doing so in a way that we show genuine love and concern for our brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. Yes.
I guess I can talk about my roommate experiences. I've actually had really great roommates. My roommate right now is the best. My wife, I love her. She's amazing. So I got it growing right now.
Happens, right?
Yeah. So I have it good right now. But my first semester, I only knew one other guy. We served our missions together in Mozambique. So we were roommates, and we got really lucky with some great people. Two of them They were a little more quiet, but really nice and respectful dudes. Mm-hmm. 2 others are like some of my best friends. They both drove hours and hours to come to my wedding in Arizona. So it was one of those where we just bonded real fast. My next apartment, everyone just got along so well. We had 2 new roommates, still some of my best friends today.
Same. 25 years later, my best friends are my roommates.
And they were amazing. We had so much unity within that apartment. And then this last semester, we had 2 roommates that had a bit of a struggle, but it didn't really affect how we all like functioned together. Right. They had their own thing. We didn't really want to get involved. So you're like, hey, you guys can hash it out, figure it out. That was the only kind of conflict that we had. But the rest of us, like when we were all together, we were completely fine. So I feel like I've been really lucky with having just some fantastic roommates that are my best friends.
Yeah. It's true. That's the ideal, right?
Yeah.
Nobody comes to college thinking, I want to live in a place where I don't feel comfortable. I don't want to come home. I have to walk on eggshells. It's always messy. Like, nobody wants that. Right. Everybody wants a place where you feel well received, happy, and that you create lifelong friendships. Mm-hmm. That's what we want. And it can happen. And it's more than luck. Yeah. Like, there are certain principles that are at play. And student living is at the heart of that. When you value and respect one another, when you love one another, when you take care of one another, that's what happens. And the natural outcome is that you leave feeling like you've made a lifelong friend.
For sure.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, so I've had kind of a mixed bag. My first semester, I had some great roommates. They were a lot of fun. We did things together. The second semester, not so much. They didn't really like freshmen, and at the time I was.
They were a freshman.
Exactly.
Right? That's what I don't get. When people say, I don't want to live with freshmen, I'm like, you once were a freshman.
Exactly.
How in the world can you not want to live with a freshman? Anyway.
Exactly, yeah. And so that kind of sucked because they would always leave us out. But other than that, I've had amazing roommates, and it's been fun. I mean, we've had our disagreements in the past, but we always come back together as friends.
Does.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Everyone does. Every living situation, every family has natural conflict that comes up.
Right, yeah.
It's how you resolve it that matters.
Mm-hmm. And we're all best friends to this day, so yeah.
Well, 3 very good examples. Thank you all for sharing those.
Of course, thank you guys. Do we want to do the spot dating and before we close?
Yes, I don't believe that we have any upcoming events, but date night on the 31st of January. So that one's going to be super fun. Make sure to mark your calendars for that. I don't exactly remember the time that it's at or too many of the details. I don't think they've been hashed out too much yet.
But get your roommates together and all of you take a date. There you go.
It'd be so fun.
Exactly.
I'll take my roommate.
Yeah, you should.
Good idea, Austin.
Thanks.
So much fun.
Well, thank you guys so much. It's been so much fun. And yeah, anything else before we close out?
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for your advice, dude. That was fantastic.
Delightful. Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, it's been so much fun. All right. Well, you've been listening to The Spot, a production of BYU-Idaho Radio. Today's hosts were
Austin Pace,
Abigail Barber,
Kriss Pond,
and Maiya Waddell. The views and opinions of this podcast are not that of BYU-Idaho Radio or the university, and are solely the opinions of the hosts. Producers were the hosts with supervision by Brandon Isle and Natalia Hepworth. Our theme music is Finding Happiness by DJ Quads and The Perpetual Ticking of Time by Artificial Music. To listen to more episodes of The Spot, like and follow us on social media or visit our website, byui.edu/radio, and click podcasts. Be sure to subscribe to The Spot podcast wherever you get your podcasts and leave a review of the show and leave a comment on what we should talk about next.